Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our program this evening. Joining me in the studio today is author Jamie Metzl. His new book, The Genesis Code, is a novel, it's a futuristic thriller, but the protagonist of the novel is an Armenian by the name of Rich Azadian. Jamie, welcome to our studios. When I got the press materials, it was very interesting, so I wanted to have you here to talk about it. You have quite an extensive resume. You have a PhD from Oxford in Asian history. You have a Juris Doctorate from Harvard Law, and you also went to Brown. You're a White House Fellow. What else? And you also are a board member of the International Center for Transnational Justice, which is a very critical issue for Armenians as we're looking at the larger issue of the Armenian genocide. So aside from this brief notes of biography, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's such an honor for me to be interacting with you and with your viewers and with the Armenian community. It's a community that I have so much respect for, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So I'm originally from Kansas City. I grew up there. You talked about my educational background. But for my entire life, human rights and a passion for human rights and justice has been essential to who I am. And part of that, like with many of your viewers, is connected to history. My father, I'm Jewish. My father was born in Austria. He and his parents were never in a camp, but technically they are survivors, came here after the war. And growing up, from my earliest childhood, we were thinking about, like people in the Armenian community, about issues of justice and rights. And I was a freshman at Brown, and I met in my class a young Cambodian-American Holocaust survivor. And I was so captivated by his story that I started reading everything I could about the Cambodia genocide. That summer went and worked in a refugee camp on the Thai-Cambodian border and became more and more committed to understanding this issue of genocide. And my PhD dissertation and my first book were about international responses to the Cambodia genocide and why we failed, why the international community failed. And at that time, I was going around to different Holocaust and genocide conferences around the country. And of course, when you're on that circuit, you interact with a lot of Armenians, because like Jews and Cambodians and Rwandans, we all share this terrible, terrible history. And part of the burden of that history is memory. And I know the Jewish community, the Armenian community have really invested a lot in that and to the historical justice. So I started learning more and more about the Armenian American community and just became absolutely captivated. And there are a lot of, as I think you know, similarities in Jewish history and Armenian history. And it's not just the history, it's culture, it's food, it's our mothers. There's a lot of things that are similar. And so just started learning more and more about Armenia. I went to Brown University as an undergraduate, and our super rock star president at that time was Vartan Grigorian, who's just a wonderful human being and, of course, a star of the Armenian American community. So in the various things that I've done, I've always stayed connected with the Armenian community. And that was why when I started writing this book and I was thinking about this character, the lead character he's Rich Azadian, but his birth name is Dikran Azadian. That it just, and we can talk a little bit more about this, it just seemed like such a natural thing to make him Armenian American.
Now, you're touching on in the book, it's taking place in the not so near, very close, near
2023.
Future. 2023, it's in a couple of years.
Yeah, who's counting?
19 years to be exact.
No, 9.
9 years to be exact.
Yeah. So I guess you're not counting.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. So Dikran Azadian is a reporter for the Kansas City Star in the year 2023. He has a PhD in philosophy, has done 3 postdocs, and then just kind of gets disgusted with this abstract life. He's actually from Glendale, California. And so he decides he wants to live more at sea level rather than at 20,000 feet. So he moves to Kansas City and becomes a reporter for the Kansas City Star. And he's investigating the death of a young woman who's found dead in her apartment. And it turns out that this woman, he discovers, was murdered, and that she was carrying a genetically enhanced embryo at the time that he was killed, which is a technology that, as far as people know, doesn't yet exist. And so he is somebody, like I'm sure you and many people, who just can't let something like this go, because he has, not just because of his Armenian background, and his passion for justice, he's not going to let something like this drop. When we talk about the centenary next year, neither of our communities are communities that let justice issues drop. And so he starts investigating and he starts digging, and the more he starts digging, the more all hell breaks loose. And he's suspended from his job and increasingly running for his life, but he starts to learn that it's not just this one woman in Kansas City who's been killed, but that young women across the United States have been impregnated with these genetically enhanced embryos, and they're being hunted down and murdered one at a time. And so while he's on the run, he's trying to figure out who's killing these women and why, and are there any others like them who may still be alive.
So why did you decide to make the lead character, the protagonist of the book, an Armenian American?
Yeah. First, because the character, as I mentioned, he's like so passionate about issues of justice and right and wrong, and he's living philosophically at 20,000 feet and actually at sea level. And there are all these kinds of struggles. When I tried to think of what are the kind of groups that have these people who are making themselves crazy with all of this unnecessary thinking, what I come up with is there's certainly the Jews and the Armenians, and as far as I can tell, I don't even know what the difference is between Jews and Armenians, and I keep asking everyone, no one knows. So certainly when I just thought about the character, that kind of philosophical struggle that's so important to the voice of the book, it just seemed like a natural fit. But the second thing is, this is my third book, my second novel. The first book was a nonfiction history of the Cambodian genocide. The second was a novel, The Depths of the Sea, set on the Thai-Cambodian border. And then this is the third. And so in the second one, I had one character who was kind of a philosophical Jewish American guy from the Midwest, which is where I'm from. And I was not very charitable with this character. That character at the end of that book got kind of brutalized because I was a critic of what that character represented. And it just drove me nuts that wherever I would go, people would say, "Oh, I know that character. That was you, wasn't it?" And it's like, no, it's not me. So this book, it's all written in a first-person narration. It's all from one character. And I thought, God, if I write like a Jewish American kind of philosophical, intellectual guy in Kansas City, like there's going to be no plausible deniability. So one of the things that I thought, well, what's the closest that I can get? But the more, so that was just a piece of it. But the more I kind of got into the character, and I did a lot of research on Armenian history. I have a very close friend, Deborah Devedjian, who lives in New York, and she's done a wonderful history of the whole history of her family, and I kind of talked about that history with her, and the more that I dug in, it just seemed that there was such a richness in not just Armenian American culture, but in Armenian American history, and I just felt like it added such a new and interesting dimension to the book. And
does his Armenianness come out in the book?
Oh, it does. It does in a lot. Well, so in the beginning of the book, he's just 6 months before he's broken up with his girlfriend, and Dikran, Rich, he's 39 years old. His mother is a widow in Glendale. And his mother, I can't speak for all the mothers, his mother is like, you're starting this pressure campaign. When are you going to get going with it? When are you going to get going with this? So he's kind of struggling with this, and he's trying to find the right relationship with his culture and with his mother. So he's half a country away, and yet he feels so closely tied. And part of his adult identity requires separation. And part of it requires connectivity, and he can't find the right balance between those two things. He really appreciates his Armenian heritage, but he also feels that sometimes there's a pull back towards the Middle Ages, and he's trying to live this modern life. Different views of what it means to be an individual, like responsibility. And we all, I mean, Jews and Armenians at least, feel this, like, what's the responsibility for individual self-actualization? And what does it mean when so many of our groups have been murdered so recently? Do you have an obligation to the collective to have kids, to raise kids in your traditions? None of these are easy answers, but I just feel like that struggle is such an important part of that character.
And it's something that certainly resonates in the lives of many Armenians because of the issue of the genocide and the issue of the genocide being unresolved in the sense that, the continued denial, this constant, struggle to make the truth just.
Yes, it's absolutely horrible. I mean, the genocide was bad enough, but to have 100 or 99 now years of denial is just an outrage. And I don't know why, to tell you the truth. I mean, the Turkey of today is a very different country than the Turkey of 99 years ago.
Some can argue that, but we do have to go to commercial break. We'll pick that up. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. If you were just joining us, my guest this evening is Jamie Metzl. He is the author of a new thriller, Genesis Code, and whose protagonist is an Armenian American, and it's a very fascinating story. You talked about it in our first segment, but we left off talking about the issue of how you as a Jew, I as an Armenian, and our collective communities, because of the hardships that we've historically lived through, seem like we're carrying a certain type of a responsibility.
Yes.
You left off by saying that Turkey is not, Turkey is a different country than it was during the Ottoman Empire. I might disagree with you, but let's have you finish your thoughts.
Well, the thought is that Turkey, it's at least not Ottoman Turkey. There certainly are all kinds of prejudices, and when I just this summer in August spent 2 weeks in Germany, and as a Jew, we have a strong connection with Germany, with a terrible history there. But I've just been so impressed what Germany has done over the last 70 years to come to terms with its past. And it's not that doing so has weakened Germany. As a matter of fact, it's made Germany 10 times stronger than it otherwise would have been. And I think that path is available to Turkey, and it's just such a shame that with that past, and today Turkey has maybe similar prejudices from 100 years ago, but it's a different regime with a different structure. And I just think that Turkey would be so much better off if they said, yes, under Ottoman times, this genocide occurred. These people were brutally murdered, and it's a terrible blot on our history. And we accept it, and we apologize, and we're going to do everything that we can in order to address that history and try to build a better, more inclusive history, not based on lies, but based on the truth. And if they were to follow the path of Germany, I think Turkey would be stronger. And the path of denial and repression and suppression, I just think, makes Turkey a much weaker country than it has to be.
Well, actually, they're getting egged on by other countries like the United States, which refuses to recognize the genocide and bring that word in within the context of what our people went through. So if you're being encouraged or you're not being encouraged, or they're living in a reality that it's okay for them to deny because countries like the United States will not budge on the issue as well.
Yeah, so. And I think that with the United States, I don't think the United States is egging on Turkey. I just think that the United States, every time we get to that point, the strategic interests of the relationship with Turkey and NATO and the Islamic world tend to override what I think most Americans would agree. So I think it's what the United States has done is not correct. But I don't think it's the United States is egging on Turkey. I think that Turkey is using all of its influence to block the United States from doing what I think most Americans think would be the right thing for our government to do, which is to recognize this genocide and give the Armenian
which the
people,
United States very easily, not easily, but it took it a long time to do with Rwanda and Cambodia,
everybody,
and even the Holocaust. So there's been a common thread going on in the last 100 years vis-a-vis genocide.
I wish we lived in a world where we could all do better, but I definitely think that part of the responsibility of Armenians, Jews, and Rwandans, and all people who are passionate about justice and human rights is just to do our bit to keep fighting that fight, not just for our groups, but for everybody.
Do you feel that by having an Armenian American character, it could potentially serve as a teaching moment for your readers who pick up the book to read a futuristic novel?
Not about the genocide, although there's references to the genocide, but it's just about a culture. I mean, we're in Glendale, and it's everything. I mean, all the restaurants are Armenian, and which is really wonderful. But the Armenian community is perhaps less well known. I mean, the people, everyone likes to look at the naked rear end of the Kardashians and whatever. But I think just in terms of a culture, it's less well known. So for me, it's something that's kind of exciting to represent and present just a different culture than many of the readers would otherwise have access to.
I want to take a moment and talk about the work of the International Center for Transnational Justice. Transitional Justice. Sorry. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So ITCJ is an organization that grew out of the South African Peace and Reconciliation Commission. At the end of apartheid, there was a question, well, what are we going to do to hold the perpetrators of apartheid accountable? But the old regime and the new regime were now part of a coalition government, so you couldn't just do full-on trials of everybody. And you couldn't just sweep it under the rug because there had been so much injustice. And so they did a pretty good job of finding a hybrid compromise where there was a Peace and Reconciliation Commission where they did everything they could to get information about what had happened out, to hold people accountable, but not have society completely shut down or everybody divided. And after that time, there was a sense, well, we've really learned a lot of lessons in South Africa. Maybe there are other places that are going through these painful transitions, and Rwanda and other places amongst them. And maybe we can bring some of that expertise out and start sharing best practices. So started doing that. And then it turned out that every one of these places where there was some terrible thing, you learned a little lesson. It was different in different places. But if you had a way of bringing all of those things together as a way of both promoting justice and accountability and, when appropriate, reconciliation, that it was a really useful body of knowledge. So now ICTJ has offices all around the world and is really doing wonderful work to try to address issues of justice and accountability and, when appropriate, reconciliation.
We talked about how the book is set 9 years from now, but how are some of the issues that are being addressed within the book, how do they tie into the larger aspect of human rights? I mean, you're talking about women being impregnated with genetically enhanced embryos. First of all, do you think scientifically it is possible to do that in 9 years? And also, how does that touch on the whole human rights aspect?
A really important question. After 200,000 years of our evolution as a species, we are right on the verge of taking active control of our evolutionary process, which is this mind-boggling thought that we've evolved over these last 200,000 years and longer, but it's been slower. And now we have the ability to basically rewrite our genetic code. And so it will definitely be the case that we will move towards altering our genes. And first, we'll do it through genetic selection in the in vitro fertilization process. And we're already doing that now with IVF. And there's a process called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, which is just choosing embryos before you implant them in the mother. And with the Human Genome Project, we'll learn more and more about what each of those blastocysts, early stage embryos, are telling us about the gene, about the future of that person if that person is born. And ultimately, it'll go from genetic selection to genetic manipulation. And my view is there's a 100% chance that this will be our future. And the reason I know it is because we are going to start pumping out, maybe that's the wrong word, genetically enhanced people next year. Because at the end, next month in Britain, there's a vote on what's called mitochondrial transfer, and it's very likely that it will pass, and it's very likely that as of next year, 3-parent children will be born. And basically, it'll be a man and a woman who have their egg and sperm brought together, and then they'll take the nucleus of that embryo and then place it in another blastocyst, another early stage cell, taking out the nucleus of that. And so you'll have 3 genetic parents of that child. So that's just a stage 1 genetically altered person, and we're just months away from doing that. So this is our future. One of the reasons why my book was featured in Cosmopolitan magazine last month is what I've said is it's the end of sex. And it's not the end of sex for all the enjoyable reasons why people have sex, but it's the end of sex, maybe played out over 50, 100 years, whatever, as a means of procreation for people who aren't ideologically driven or destitute. Because through the IVF process and genetic selection, we'll be able to eliminate all of these genetic diseases that have plagued us for hundreds of thousands of years. We'll be able to eliminate cancers, we'll be able to make ourselves more robust, we'll live longer, all of these wonderful things, and everybody is going to want it, and insurance companies and government are going to have incentives to help make it possible. The cost of screening genomes is going to go down towards nothing. So there's this future that's very exciting in some ways, and there's the dangerous part of it, because there's the part of this where kind of crazy things are going to be possible, like chimeric embryos, part animal, part human, synthetic biology. And you talked about human rights, we're kind of coming up to this phase, this transitional phase, where what it means to be a human being is going to change. It will have profound implications for our humanity and for human rights. And that brings me back to the book. The book, it has a lot of science in it, but ultimately it's a love story. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of science in humans. There's a lot of genes in humans, but we are more, for now at least, than our genetic code. And the essence of what it means to be a human is to love, to connect, to be in community, to do all of these incredible things that are the core of our humanity. And so the reason I wrote the novel was to bring together the science and the history and the culture, but ultimately also the humanity.
The book is Genesis Code by Jamie Metzl. You can meet the author in person tomorrow night. That's Friday, November 14th at 7:30 p.m. at Abril Bookstore, which is located at 415 East Broadway in Glendale. He will be there. He will be signing books.
I will.
And talking about this story more. Thank you so much for
my pleasure.
Coming here. It was certainly a pleasure. And thank you for joining us and staying tuned with our programming. And see you all next time. Good evening.